I witnessed 2 suicides in front of my eyes.
Need paper leak.
Need 2026 paper leak.
The world is not stupid. You're not going to confuse anybody anymore. I really don't see the basis for your question.
In your response, you said, quote, it is hypocrisy.
I thought you were supposed to ask me a question.
On 25th July, something happened in Delhi that would have been absolutely unimaginable a few years ago. After weeks of youth protest over examination failures and paper leaks, India's education minister had finally resigned. Not after losing an election, not after losing a vote of confidence, but after protesters demanded that he should go. And protesters celebrated the resignation as a victory. But here is the strange part. This is the same government that has spent years pushing through extraordinarily difficult political decisions. It has survived massive protests. It has taken on powerful foreign governments. It has negotiated simultaneously with Washington, Beijing, and Moscow. In January this year, India and the European Union concluded one of the most historic landmark free trade agreement covering an economic relationship worth over 100 billion euro. So why can this government stand for its own right against other countries, but why does it struggle with its own citizens? And more importantly, that why do some protests fail completely, but other protests make the Modi government bend? I think the answer has got very little to do with how loud the protest is, but it has got absolutely everything to do with who is exactly protesting.
कहता पापा मैं मर जाऊं, बस अब ये स्थिति है, तो क्यों नहीं आदमी करेगा, क्यों नहीं आदमी, आज हम अपने बच्चों के लिए आए हैं.
Now let's be fair before we go any further. The claim that Modi cannot handle protest is just simply wrong. Look at the record, look at the evidences. The anti-CAA protest did not force the government to repeal the Citizenship Amendment Act. The Agnipath protest in 2022 did not kill the Agnipath scheme. The government defended it. The scheme survived. So that is our number one clue, that protest by itself does not make the Modi government retreat. It can absorb enormous street pressure. The government can wait, the government can negotiate, and sometimes it can simply outlast the protest. So, if protests are not the deciding factor, then what is? And for that, we need to go back to 2020. 3 farm laws. The government believed that those were economic reforms. But farmers, particularly in Punjab, Haryana and Western Uttar Pradesh, saw some serious risk. And then that protest became extraordinary. It did not last 3 days, it just did not last 3 weeks, but it lasted for almost a year. Negotiations failed, the government waited, the Supreme Court intervened, but still the protest continued. And then finally on November 19, 2021, Narendra Modi appeared before the country and he announced that the 3 laws would be repealed. The government's own economic argument had not suddenly disappeared. The laws did not suddenly become bad economics, but something else had changed, the political calculation. And this is where the story gets interesting, because the farmers were not simply protesting against the BJP. They were protesting in those areas where the BJP desperately needed political support. Punjab, Haryana and Western UP. And the 2024 election tells us that why exactly that mattered. BJP went from 303 Lok Sabha seats in 2019 to 240. For the first time in Modi's national tenure, BJP itself had no longer a majority. It needed allies. The 2024 result does not prove that the farmers' protest caused BJP's losses. But it definitely demonstrated something much more important, that a protest does not have to defeat a government immediately to change its political risk calculation. And the government had learned a lesson. And here is the rule which I think explains much of the Modi's protest politics. The government ignores a protest that it believes is outside its political coalition. But a protest becomes much dangerous when it starts entering the coalition itself. And that is why Agnipath is fascinating. The protesters were angry at that time. They were violent. There were violent demonstrations. The scheme attracted enormous opposition. But the government held its line. Why? because the government believed political cost of retaining the reform was manageable. Now you compare that with the farmers. There, the protest was becoming entangled with an electorally important constituency. Same government, same willingness to use political power, but completely different outcomes. And then 2026 produced an even more interesting test, because this time the protesters were not farmers, they were the young Indians, and that is a constituency which no major political party can or would want to afford to ignore.
I witnessed 2 suicides in front of my eyes. I committed to it, but for some reason I decided to call my father, and for some reason he decided to say, "Hat boka, chole aaye ghar." I'm a Bengali. He said, "Are aa jao ghar kar." He had the money that he could buy me a ticket at that same day. मेरे साथ ऐसे बच्चे पढ़ते हैं जिनके मम्मी पापा ने ये बोल के भेजा है कि तब तक मत आना जब तक हो जाए, बिकॉज दे डोंट हैव द मनी टू. वो लोग जनरल में बैठ के जाते हैं, जनरल में बैठ के आते हैं कीड़ों की तरह. कॉकरोच तो इन्होंने बोल दिया था, बस हम तो पहले से भी हैं.
The story begins almost absurdly. In May 2026, a Supreme Court remark about unemployed young people triggered outrage online. A young political communications strategist, Abhijit Deepke, turned the insult into satire. And the name was Cockroach Janata Party. It was initially a joke, it was initially a meme, but then came the NEET crisis, paper leaks, exam irregularities, students who had spent years preparing, parents who had spent lakhs on coaching, and suddenly the joke acquired a target. And the target was the system. Almost 23 lakhs candidates appeared in NEET. And that is the scale of the anxiety that we are talking about. This was not an ideological protest about left versus right. It was not primarily about Hindu versus Muslim. It was not even about BJP versus Congress. But it was about something which was much more dangerous politically. The students simply asked that we followed the rules, but why didn't the system follow the rule? And that question travels incredibly fast. A student tells his parents, parents tell relatives, a coaching center tells that to thousands of students, a video reaches millions, and suddenly a paper leak becomes a crisis of trust. And then came the confrontation. Thousands gathered at Jantar Mantar. Protesters demanded accountability. The movement persisted for weeks and weeks. And finally, on July 25th, Dharmendra Pradhan resigned as education minister. And that was the protesters' central demand. And they had got it. Reuters has described this particular youth movement as one of the most significant political challenges which Modi had faced since coming to power. And now here is a detail which I find even more interesting than the resignation itself. On August 17, the BJP replaced its social media head. Reuters also state that the organizational reshuffle came weeks after the youth protest, which had been amplified heavily because of social media. Now, we cannot say that the protest caused that reshuffle, but the timing tells us something very important about the political environment. The BJP has spent years mastering the social media, and now there is a generation that has learned that same weapon, how to use it against the political establishment, and that changes the entire game. Coming back to our original question, that why India often looks so much comfortable when we deal with the foreign pressure, but why does the government struggle at home? Because international politics is fundamentally transactional. There you negotiate, there you exchange, you delay, you threaten others, you try to compromise, you create leverage. India can tell Europe that you want access to our market, then here is what we need in return. India can tell America that you need us strategically, then we need your technology and investment. India can maintain relationships with Russia while deepening its ties with the West. This is what strategic autonomy looks like in practice, and India's foreign policy flexibility is real. But when you talk about your home, you cannot negotiate with a student whose paper has leaked. What are you going to offer to him? A tariff reduction, a diplomatic partnership, or a strategic corridor? No. He wants fairness. There is no diplomatic back channel at Jantar Mantar. There are no confidential trade negotiation. There is no 6-month gap between action and consequences. A student is standing there with a phone. Another student is live streaming. A parent is watching. Millions can see the police confrontation. Millions can see the minister's response. And plenty of people can also see the government's reaction. Domestic politics happens in real time. And that is why domestic politics can be much harder than the geopolitics. So, I don't think the Modi government is weak at home. That is a wrong conclusion. It is actually extraordinarily strong at home. The more interesting conclusion is this, that the Modi government is strongest when it can define the conflict as government versus the opposition. But it becomes vulnerable when the conflict becomes government versus those people who would normally expect the government to represent them. And that is a fundamental difference. The farmer who feels abandoned, the student who feels cheated, the young graduate who cannot find a job, the middle class family that feels that the system is becoming unfair. These people are not automatically opposition parties. And that's precisely why they are dangerous. Because an opposition leader can be dismissed as political. But a protester from your own voter base cannot be dismissed so easily. And perhaps that is the real political test for Modi's third term. Not whether India can get a better deal from Europe, not whether Modi can negotiate with Trump or Putin, not whether India can become a bigger global power. Those are important, those are very important. But here is a more basic question. Can this Modi government maintain the trust of the generation that is supposed to inherit the India the government is trying to build? Because a government does not become vulnerable when everyone hates it, but it does become vulnerable when people who once believed in it stop believing. And that is why the most important political battle in India may not be happening on the international stage at all. It may be happening at Jantar Mantar, because countries can negotiate with India. But when India's own citizens start saying that we believed in you, now you prove it, then that is a pressure which no foreign policy can solve. This is Groom Guru. Do hit the subscribe button and I'll see you in the next one.